morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you happen to find yourself in the world at the moment, and welcome to QS in Conversation Live. I'm Anton John Crace, and I'm the editor and program designer at QS Quacquarelli Simmons. Now, if you follow me on social media, you'll know I've met with our speakers for today's session yesterday, and it was already a cracker of a pre-meeting, so I don't want to take up too much time. However, thank you very much to you for joining me, and also thank you very much to our speakers. They are Beverly Oliver, Emeritus Professor and Principal Consultant at EduBrief, Gordon Scott, Managing Director at Successful Graduate, and of course, our very own Kim Nguyen, Director, Global Market Development at QS Enrollment Solutions. Now, this week's episode is on engaging with employers, and this is the reason why it's such a hot topic. To get it started, my very first question is, are universities doing enough to engage with employers? Are there areas and opportunities for further engagement, such as embedding small to medium enterprises into coursework? And to start us off, I'll go to you, Beverly.
Excellent. So I get the hard question first. Thank you very much, Anton. Well, here's my answer. In education, you never do enough. So it's the nature of the industry. You can never say, actually, I'm done, I'm finished, I've done enough for my student. So in that light, really, I would say no. Universities in general can never do enough and can never actually sort of rest on their laurels. I think particularly into the world we're heading into, I think we need to be far more focused on the student. And I'd like us to remember the student can be anything from a school leaver to someone who's in their 60s or 70s or 80s. People are studying right across the lifespan and will continue to do so. So whatever they're engaging in, what are they hoping to achieve? Is employment part of that? And for many or the majority, that will be why they're doing this particular formal qualification. So in that case, what are we doing to make them have the best chance of success? But before I finish, I might just say the new normal will mean that we, as higher education providers, we need to think about where the jobs are going to be and where the value is going to be in any formal qualification or micro-credential. And so how are we going to deliver that value to the learner? Because we are engaging with people across the lifespan for all of those reasons. And for those reasons alone, we have to be extremely cognizant that this is a value proposition that we absolutely must deliver on. At the moment, I would say the delivery is imperfect because all human industries are, but I think we can and must do better. So I'll make that my opening gambit.
Perfect. Now, Gordon, I'll ask you the same question. Are universities doing enough to engage with employers?
Very similar answers, Anton. I think that universities realise, indeed the entire education sector realises the dramatic shift and the change that present circumstances have brought upon our education sector globally. The chips are down, enrolments are down, and it is time to reassess exactly what kind of services we're providing to our clients. Our clients are the students. And so, clearly every institution would love to engage more with employers. I guess the question is how? The majority of employers around the world are small to medium enterprises, which was part of your question, Anton. Therefore, how does an institution develop sufficient resources to engage with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of potential employers when indeed universities themselves are in a situation right now where they're having to lay off staff due to a lack of income? I think it's a very difficult issue, and I think clearly part of the solution is going to have to be some form of a scalable digital approach to being able to onboard organisations that may take an interest in graduate outcomes.
Yes, absolutely. And finally, I'll go to you, Kim. From your perspective, is there more work? What are the opportunities for universities when it comes to providing employability skills and opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with what Beverly and Gordon have both said. Where I'll pick up from what Gordon was just saying is that I really do think it's a time for universities to take stock. the past 6 months, that's what businesses have been doing. We've been looking at how we can restructure, how we can digitize, how we can automate, how we can work smarter. Universities have been talking about it for decades, really. So it's really their opportunity now to take this pandemic and act on it. One of the things that I was thinking about after we spoke yesterday was that when we talk to students, prospective students, 2/3 of them say that career outcomes is one of the major reasons or one of the main factors in them choosing the course that they're going to study. So if that's what 2/3 of your students are saying, how much of that do we address when they come on campus, when they log into their first course? So enough, probably in workload, they're doing enough, but is it the right things? Probably not. So that's kind of where I would make that comment.
Now, of course, the audience is very much part of this as we are. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A section. And we'll have a couple of polls coming up for you shortly, but not right now. Gordon, your rhetorical question of how do they go about engaging with this actually sort of hits into my next question, which is, what is the role of student services in employability? And I suppose because you've brought this up, I'll throw that question straight to you.
Okay, sure. Well, look, in Australia, we have a fantastic community called NAGCAS, the National Association of Graduate Careers Advisory Services. There are similar bodies that exist in markets around the world. I'm a member of NAGCAS and have supported the NAGCAS conference when it was held here in Brisbane a couple of years ago. So I got to see firsthand how a number of our colleagues have been looking to reinvent this very topic across the university landscape in Australia. And it's interesting to see that there are some institutions that are applying scale to try and onboard employers. There are others, I won't name them, which are developing membership types. So an employer could potentially become a member of a group that they establish, which would pair students and graduates with those members. And there would be certain marketing benefits that would come associated with that approach. There are others that probably have a little or less engagement with employers and do leave the traditional model in place, whereby a student is left to their own devices. And there are others, again, which I take my hat off to them, which are actually engaging in a variety of different layers of employability support for the student. They're preparing them not only with their hard skills through their academic training, they're preparing them with their soft skills through a series of tutorials, which are often held online. They're supporting them with job application skills, but they're also engaging with digital providers to help them with demonstrated experience, to develop experiential learning techniques. You know, one of those companies that I've witnessed do that very well in the Australian market is a company called Practera. So I hope there are people from Practera watching. I think they've become a little bit of a catalyst for what we're going to see a lot more of within the industry, certainly in the Australian context.
Now, Beverly, I know that you had a lot of comments, especially around on this, especially around the use of the term soft skills. So the question for you is the same. What is the role of student services in employability?
Look, I think every aspect of a university has a role to play. And I think Gordon really has probably canvassed that one quite well. I think there are things that other levels of the university can do. So I think a really strategic university needs to be in deep partnership with industry and industry groups. So for one example, universities can talk more systematically to peak bodies, I think, and peak bodies across the disciplines. So, you know, I'd like us to remember that, you know, universities are all different and they teach different clusters of disciplines. Some teach an awful lot in the health and medical disciplines, others engineering, business, many comprehensive across all disciplines. So I think it's about picking off what are the main disciplines on offer here and where are the students, and I use these words carefully, most likely to want to spend their career. Because if you're studying in a particular field of education, there's a good chance if it's very professionally defined, that you will want to end up working in that career. I say, for example, if you're a nurse, there's a very good chance you're going to end up working in the health system, obviously. But if you're an accountant or an IT person, it's a very good chance that you might work across any of the industries. And in Australia, we have 19 industries and 8 occupations. And I'm not sure that that's a frame of reference that higher education providers actually use very often. So it's about having a labour market presence and state of mind, I think, and looking strategically at where the jobs are going to be. Many governments do this analysis. They do economic indicators to say, this is where we think the jobs are going to be. So the job of the provider then, as well as dealing with student demand, and I'm not suggesting we channel students, but let students go where they like, but let them be very clear from day one about what the likely prospects are for employment when they've done this, and start that conversation actually before they sign up, not in the last year before they finish and start thinking about a job. And of course, I say that in the context of what I said before, is that students, learners, if I call them learners rather than students, they can be right across the life span. So they may be people who've been working already. They may not. They may be well advanced in their career. They may be displaced now. So how are they going to navigate their way? So I think, you know, there's many things that universities can be doing, particularly agreed through the student services, but way more than that. I think it has to be a whole of institution strategy.
If I could jump in, I totally agree with
Yes,
that. And I mean, this then raises the issue of at what age does a poor old student have to make a decision about their future? Because we're seeing in the Australian market and elsewhere higher fees being charged for university degrees and indeed vocational studies as well. And so at what point does the student have to make a decision about where they're going to be investing their efforts? And it's so difficult because, you know, for young people, it's the old story. The prefrontal cortex hasn't been properly formed until they're 22, 23, 24 years old. They can't think logically until they're actually reached that age. So I think I feel for them. And I've now reached an age where my own children are at this stage. And, you know, I'm witnessing another generation go through that angst. But the answer surely lies in providing these students with as much exposure to the workplace prior to having to make that decision as is possible, which is what this topic's about. So sorry to jump in, Beverly, but I just wanted to make that point.
So I might just add to that if I can, Anton. So
yes,
I mean,
please.
Anton, you can go. We'll just have a chat here. Thank you. Just kidding. So, you know, I think young people and not so young people need to look at all the various disciplines and courses that are on offer. And as I say that, you know, you can almost divide them into those more professionally defined and those that are more generic. Someone asked me a few years ago, if you had someone wanting to start their university study now, which way would you go? I'd actually go the more generic, because I think that's your basic education that will teach you right across a discipline and will possibly have skills embedded in it that are going to be more that will last over time, for example. And I say that as an arts graduate myself, and I've never regretted having studied a generic arts degree. It was the most wonderful privilege I ever had, and subsequent degrees after. But I think also, even while I say that, I feel a bit sad, because what we haven't done is actually come up with more interdisciplinary offerings. And I think that's where we let people down. That we get them to choose very early, maybe in the secondary school system that funnels them in a certain channel. But what we do know as people go forward now in this era is that it's not going to be like it used to be. School, then big clump of learning at either a university or a vocational education. It'll be across, backwards, forwards, and macro, micro credentials right across the lifespan. But the common thread will be, for a great deal of it, will be, what is the value proposition of this in terms of how is this going to improve my chance of getting a job, keeping a job, or getting a better job? And I think we need to kind of not argue about the employability agenda anymore, but just take it as given, that this is why people go invest time and money in formal and non-formal qualifications. So how are we going to actually deliver on that? So it's like devise where the job's going to be first and head the student or the learner towards that from day dot. I'll say more about that later if we get on to talking about assessment, but you know, I think
Absolutely.
That's
Well, I think that you've hit some very important points to address, because even though, yes, of course, if you study nursing, you're going to become a nurse. I spoke to some people around MBAs, and increasingly the types of people that were doing them were engineers who were getting into management positions, and increasingly healthcare workers who were getting into hospital management or healthcare management. So there was a need for not just the practical skills behind that, but also the administrative abilities, those employment skills as well. I will throw over to Kim now. What is the role of student services and employability? And I should add that Kim's working on, her department is working on a 21st century skills gap report. So she should have quite a bit of knowledge on this as well, available next month.
Thanks, Anton. I thought you were going to ask me to summarize it for everybody. I was getting a little bit of sweaty palms there. Wonderful. Yeah, so I think, yeah, again, you know, Gordon and Beverly, you've hit some really important topics that do need to be addressed with employers and with universities. But if we talk about student services themselves, we work really closely with university support services at QS Enrollment Solutions. So I know that when we talk about cost cutting and hundreds of jobs, those are the types of jobs that are going to start to get cut. You know, the counseling centers, the healthcare center, the career center, the math center, the writing center. So my fear is that there's going to be an expectation that they do more with less. And that's just going to, it's going to fail. The students aren't going to get what they need. So thinking about this, you know, you think about how universities have pivoted recently. They're using their current students to talk to prospective students. They're using their graduates to talk to, you know, the undergraduate students to go into postgraduate as a peer-to-peer. And when we think about what career services could do, they can't do that. There's thousands of students to every one or two career service professionals. But what they can do is they can facilitate, they can try to create this as a business would, a project plan. How do you ensure that there's a really strong framework that's very clear to students? And that's where I think the missing gap, the gap is universities have hundreds of thousands of wonderful pieces of content, but the students don't utilize them because it's unclear that it's for them, it's unclear how they do it, and they're time poor. So for me, student services, again, they need to take this opportunity to think about what they currently have. Is it digital? Is it virtual? And how do they bring it to the right students at the right time? As opposed to leaving it there and letting it be self-serve. Because students in their first year won't self-serve. They don't know what that means. They've just come from a place, especially in undergraduate, where they've been handheld all the way through, and then all of a sudden it's great, you got into uni, off you go, which is what Beverly said earlier, you know, to the same frame. So for me, student services is a place where I do think is going to feel the pain over the next 6 to 12 months, but I do think it's an opportunity for them to think about increasing efficiencies and allowing the strategies to grow past just that office of careers or health or whatnot.
Yes. So again, if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question, our Q&A function is open. So please feel free to go into that. While you consider a question, we're going to ask a question back to you. Our first poll question is it the university's responsibility to teach entrepreneurial skills? Now, entrepreneurial skills are very different from employment skills, so think carefully on that. In the meantime, Kim, I'll go back to you. We did touch on this, and you have the report coming out soon. What are the significant skills gaps for graduates currently who are seeking employment?
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, Anton, the report's being put out by QS Intelligence Unit, so Gabrielle's leading on that from the team, but obviously all of Wakils will be using it and we'll be providing it to our clients and our networks. The research has said consistently, because we do this employers survey as well as a prospective student survey. So last year, when we put the surveys together, we wanted to see where it all lined up, where it matched, but more importantly, where the gaps were, where the discrepancies were. So looking at employers, what we found was that problem solving, resilience, and communication are the three things that there's the biggest gap. And how we measure that is that those are the most important things for an employer from a new graduate employee, but that's their lowest satisfaction with their current experience. So when I look at that, I guess it really resonates right now because we work in a big business, we work in a huge sector. And if you can't problem solve and if you're not resilient, you're not going to make it past your probation period at a big corporation or at an SME. So these are things that we have to create the opportunities for students while they're studying, while they're in a safe learning environment to try, to test, to fail, to experience before they go out to an employer where there's high expectations. You don't get too many chances once somebody's paying you a salary. So that for me, that's a really critical piece to remember. The work integrated learning projects we put in, the internships, the group work out in industry, is it providing an experience for students to problem solve on their own, to come up with their own solutions to issues, identifying those issues? Are we building resilience? Are we giving them an opportunity to build resilience, by receiving feedback, by having to give and take with their classmates and their peers, and then obviously communication of that. And we see that, as managers ourselves and employers ourselves, we see that effective communication is something that is constantly practiced. I'll speak for myself, but you improve every single time you meet somebody else, every single time you sit in on a meeting, you improve your communication skills. And if we're not giving students the opportunity to listen to professionals speak, they're only going to ever repeat what they hear, which is either through rote learning or through what their academics say. So for me, it's critical that we close these gaps. And I don't think it's impossible. I think we already have quite a few opportunities to do it. We just have to I guess, hone in the focus on what we're trying to do.
This also hits on some comments that Ben Sauter, the Senior Vice President at QS, made at Apple last year, which is that students very much need to be given the opportunity and the space to fail. Through failure, you build that resilience, you build that ability to make different choices. I will throw the same question over to you, Gordon, which is what, from your mind, are the significant skills gaps for graduates who are seeking employment at the moment?
I think we see different trends, students from some overseas markets have a different cultural upbringing. And so therefore, from an international student perspective, depending upon the market they've come from, they may not have critical thinking skills. They may not have been brought up in an environment where they've been encouraged to challenge what's been taught to them in the classroom. They may not have a lot of independence or personal relationship building skills. Probably the biggest one that I've seen for students, regardless of whether they're domestic or international, is team skills, having the ability to work as part of a collaborative team. And time and time again, employers tell us, we need somebody who can be an immediate fit. We need to know they're going to fit into an existing team of people. Some people, still think that a high academic achievement is going to get them a job. I guess, we've got to mention that only somewhere between 5 and 7% of employers frequently in employer surveys say that is their primary concern. And in fact, 80% of students, 20% of students are the ones that are going to pick up the El Primo positions, graduate positions, which are often the ones that institutions are encouraging their students to pursue. So what do we do with the other 80%? And that other 80% needs to have, absolutely agree, the resilience, the confidence, the ability to satisfy a raft of other soft skills which employers require, and they're going to have to do it on their own. So if they're unable to pick up some sort of a work placement or work experience or will through their institution, it's down to them to be able to gain the work experience that they need to be able to demonstrate those soft skills in their job application. And I think that what we need to be doing above all else is helping students to think for themselves and work out how to get themselves their own position, rather than rely upon an institution to do it for them. I'm not suggesting that our good colleagues in student services are doing that, but what I am saying is that there are many students who still seem to think that if I study at X university, then that university will get me a job. And so we've got to build a generation of individuals that are capable of self-serving.
And this also hits onto some of the comments that we were making yesterday. I have for a long time been a crusader against the term best and brightest, simply because it implies that there is the worst and dullest, and that universities should be servicing for all students, regardless of their academic ability and also their career goals. Now, we have the results for our first poll, which is the university's responsibility to teach entrepreneurial skills. 81% has said yes, and 19% has said no. And I'm looking forward to discussing this a little bit further. But before we do, Beverly, for you, where are the significant skills gaps at the moment?
Well, I would have to come back to the idea of the discipline, because I think you can't talk about the learners across all the disciplines and across, you know, undergrad, postgrad, whatever. And if you only look at undergrad, it depends. You would have to ask the discipline bodies. So we would have to ask, you know, what are the gaps for engineers versus educators? Because a lot of students who go through universities, especially in this country, end up teaching, and that's a good vocation. Likewise, nursing, accounting, architecture, whatever. So I think we need to go to discipline level. I think it's too easy to use global surveys that sometimes really just take a slice of the business market, because yes, a lot of people do end up working in small or large businesses, but many, many people don't. So I think with that caveat, we can be pretty sure that what most universities would describe as their graduate attributes, soft skills, 21st century skills, whatever, there's pretty much a common list, and we've talked about some of them already. And I think that they are the things that you need regardless of where you end up. And I just go back to that point that even though you may think your first job is going to be in nursing because you did a nursing degree, there's every chance you might, for example, take on a role in a school because you become the school nurse. Or if you're an accountant, you could work pretty much anywhere. So I think what I'd probably add to the conversation, it is about giving students the opportunities to experience those things. But I think you have to build in a mindset that your job as an educator is to help the student think about those things and build evidence. So it's very tempting to say, well, we need to teach all these general skills, we need to assess them. Well, yes, you can assess some of them, but many of them you can't. So I would say as educators, we need a mindset that says, actually, every student who comes within my bailiwick, I need to help them have a presence of mind that they need to gather their evidence all the time. And if any of us have ever sat with a career coach or someone who's given us employment advice, they will help us dig into our experience and actually elicit things that we've done. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. You know, a lot of universities and other providers are using things like portfolios, student portfolios. Now, a student portfolio can be an entire wardrobe of things that everything I've ever thought about and done as a student. However, what it does do is if you do it right, you will help a student have at the front of their minds a ready answer, almost their elevator pitch about, yes, I have actually got resilience and I've shown it on this, and this occasion. Yes, I have got problem solving skills. And here are 3 examples when I've done that with different groups of people. So I think it's about that mindset that where the student always has to create and curate evidence of their achievements around all of these things, as well as the technical skills, but these general skills as well.
Yeah, this is what I meant by being able to demonstrate as well. I agree. And it is going to be so difficult for a graduate or a student to be able to compete with others for one position which is looking for demonstrated skills if they haven't had any kind of experience in the past. And so, you know, the core issue today is, should we be engaging more with employers as institutions? The answer is yes, but I don't think we should allow the student to feel complacent that the institution will give them that exposure to the employer.
we were only into our third question, and we're already halfway through our thing. So I'll move this discussion on, and know that we can easily talk about this for quite a while longer. The reason I want to move on is because, as I said, the results of the first poll was that 81% of our audience said that yes, it is the responsibility of universities to teach entrepreneurial skills. I want to ask the audience the second question, which is, there is generally a good understanding of what graduate employability means, and I'm looking forward to discussing that with the panelists. For you, Beverly, can entrepreneurial skills be taught, and can they be taught at university?
I'd go back to my original thinking. I can't think as an educator of anything that can't be taught. So yes, I think you can teach. Even if you can't teach some things, I'm battling to think about what you can't teach, but you can create an atmosphere where people can think about their own experience. I think I'd go so far as to say that at all levels of education now, post-COVID, I think we need to have a mindset where we actually imbue into students a mindset about sustainability in any kind of business enterprise, whether that's your own personal entrepreneurial effort or any kind of enterprise that you work in, because sustainable business is something that we have to get better at, because it's what sustains an economy, and that means better prosperity and all the other good things that come with it. So I'm not just saying that's all that education is about, but I think all educators, and particularly universities, need to build in entrepreneurial skills. I would go so far as to say, in fact, and some people might not agree with me on this one, but there are core skills that we keep talking about, those 21st century skills. I would go as far as to say financial literacy or entrepreneurial skills are something that should be a new core literacy in a university curriculum, undergraduate and postgraduate. I think we should all have the skills to be able to suss out whether a novel idea is something that would float and fly, and that we could find and create meaningful work for ourselves and for others. And I think that's going to be the world we're living in. And right there then, I sort of gave you my own personal definition, or part of it, of employability anyway. And I think it is that. It's about making sure a graduate of whatever level of university they go to or school can say that they know what they're supposed to learn next in order to keep up and to be able to keep themselves employed, but also to create and find meaningful work for others as well. So that's a long answer to a short question, sorry.
As with most things in life, it's never quite as simple as it seems to be. For you, Gordon, can entrepreneurial skills be taught, and can universities teach them?
Yes and yes. Can you lead a horse to water? Yes, you can. Will the horse drink? That's the question. Yes, and I think I look upon entrepreneurial skills as one of several employability skills. I agree, Beverly. I think it's core in this day and age. I can't think of a conversation I've had in the last 3 or 4 years with a student that hasn't touched upon entrepreneurialism. And so the question is everybody capable of being an entrepreneur? Perhaps there's a different answer there. My personal view is yes, they are capable, whether it's their safe zone, whether it goes to their strengths of their personality, who knows, but any skill can be taught. Here we go with the good old nature versus nurture debate. I'll be interested to see what side of the debate you fall on, Kim, in a minute. No doubt we'll go to you in a tick. But I firmly believe that it is going to be incredibly difficult for anybody to survive within their career over the next 40 or 50 years without having some form of entrepreneurialism embedded within their psyche. Right down to the fact that, a career for life is dead. And we're dealing with individuals now which are going to be running probably from contract to contract for the majority of their career. They're going to need to know how to pivot. They're going to need to know how to, to cover a whole bunch of different entrepreneurial facets just in the course of their own career and managing their career, let alone the work that they do. So look, yes and yes is my answer. Another long one, sorry.
Yes and yes, and a lot of definition behind that. I'm going to go to you, Kim, again with the same question, just can they be taught? And bear in mind, a fifth of the audience has said that it's not the responsibility of universities to teach them. So if they can teach them, then why does a fifth of the audience think that they shouldn't?
So now you're giving me the hard part of the question.
That's right. No, do you have any counter arguments to the presentations so far by Beverly and Gordon?
Not counter arguments, but my take on it is probably the nature versus nurture. So I have this gut sense that to be an entrepreneur is something that somebody has in themselves, and maybe a lot of people do. And a university can teach the skills, they can give opportunities for students to practice the skills, and maybe that fosters and nurtures that skill out of somebody who didn't realize that they were interested in, or might be successful in being an entrepreneur. But there's a whole, I think there's a huge proportion of entrepreneurial skills that can be taught and should be taught, because as Gordon says, everyone will benefit from it, whether or not that's your strong skill set and that's something that you actually embrace, knowing that that's something that you can do if you put your mind to it, or even recognizing it in your colleagues and understanding, oh, okay, that actually is why they're a very strong leader, or that's why they've been promoted to become the next manager or deputy vice chancellor or whoever, because they have that skill set that I understand is important in entrepreneurialism. But I do stick with, I think, to be a really effective entrepreneur, again, effective, how do you define that? Successful, how do you define that? But that probably does come to a character. And universities aren't teaching that, but they are, I do see, and I've seen instances just in my own workplaces where somebody has a specific role, they're hired for that specific skill set, but because they had opportunities to do something else with a different team, that actually kind of was brought to the surface, and then they became a completely different person and a completely different professional. So I think that can happen in a university setting when a student comes in not having a fully developed frontal lobe, thinking that I think I'm going to be an accountant because I'm great at maths, I want to work at this big bank, and then they come out of it and say, actually, I want to work to be an accountant, but at a smaller firm because this is what I believe in.
I think the question, Anton, should have been, can entrepreneurial skills be taught online?
Well, I think that I'll answer on behalf of all of you is yes, they probably can, because you all didn't want to take the bait and have the argument that entrepreneurial skills can't be taught at all and they can't be taught at universities. That said, we do have now the results for our poll from the last question, which was, there is generally a good understanding of what graduate employability means. And unsurprisingly, 62% of our audience said no. By the way, we also do have a Q&A. We have two questions that have come through the audience. I'll get to them in a little bit. This is something we talked about yesterday, and I think it is worth discussing again. Cameron Mirza, who is going to speak at the upcoming Maple Conference in September, has made an argument that employability and employment are not the same things. Beverly, could you speak a little bit to that point?
Yes, I can, with pleasure. Absolutely, employment is not employability. You can be employed, but not highly employable. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but it's a fact. You can be highly employable, but the labour market is against you, the trend is against you, and there's just too much competition. So yes, let's unpack those two things. But I would say, well, I'd like to share actually that I've done a lot of reading in the peer-reviewed literature. In fact, I'm the editor of a journal of graduate employability. And, my scan of the field, and I'm going to quote Leonard Holmes here, who is a UK writer, is that there are three areas to graduate employability in the field of research. And this is how it's kind of working out so far. It started off, we were all very focused on the possession of certain skills, and we've talked about that tonight, resilience, problem solving, whatever. Yes, you do need certain skills. There's another stream, another field of thought that says, well, actually, it's more about, or equally about your position. So I'm using P's here, possession of skills, position. That is actually making use of the social capital you have. Or if you don't have much social capital, knowing that you don't and knowing how to network better. So that's your position. And the last one is really around process. In other words, and I think this is becoming a universal, how do you actually go through the process of navigating your career and navigating the world of work as it's unfolding in the future? So just to recap on that, the whole field of graduate employability and the research that's been done so far is really around, will possessing these skills actually, is that the key? Is it about position and knowing what your position is and making the most of it? Or is it actually showing students how to process and navigate their careers? There has been some research recently which actually gives credence to two of them. That is possession. Yes, you do need certain skills, or I would say evidence of certain skills. That's two different things. And also, we can make a difference if we educate students more around the labour market, the world of work, and how to navigate, as Gordon has said, how to apply for a job, how to actually present yourself, do all those things. So you don't need to do a bit of all of that. That's my answer.
Thank you very much for that. Kim, do you have anything to add on top of that? I know that you had a lot of comments about the differences between these two yesterday.
No, I think Beverly's covered it, not to waste time repeating it. So I absolutely agree. And I think, Beverly, thank you for sharing the 3 Ps. That actually just made me to kind of take that step back and think about what that means for myself. So that's really interesting.
And Gordon?
Yeah, look, I think that's very, very valid. I guess my question would be, or my comment would be, for a graduate, position may be difficult for them to demonstrate. And I guess, Beverly, that's why you had suggested that possession and process probably take precedence. And this is the issue we're dealing with. Graduates don't have an awful lot of social capital, don't have necessarily the demonstrated experience that others would further down their career when it comes to competing for certain positions. I think graduate employability, we almost need to talk about graduate underemployment as well at the moment. And we touched on this issue yesterday. New statistics emerging as a result of the pandemic, talking about people going from full-time work to part-time work, and they're still unable to cover their bills. I think employability really needs to be contextualized according to the conversation. And I'll have a conversation with an academic who'll have a completely different understanding about what employability is to a conversation I might have with a student or with a parent. Ultimately, employability, what we try and do as successful graduate is to encourage people to learn online in a group environment about the skills that they need in order to apply for a position and hold a position. And absolutely, networking is a key to that. The hidden job market is something we haven't really touched on today, but the vast number of jobs that are out there that are never advertised and are picked up through word of mouth. One might argue this comes back to position again, but I think for a student, there are many things that they can do to be able to engage online and in person, to be able to take advantage of the hidden job market and get out there and network. But it still involves the development of skills, those communication skills that they need to be able to conduct that process.
And I agree with you, Gordon. I know we're not meant to agree, we're meant to disagree, but sorry, can't help agreeing. Yeah. But it's exactly right. I was thinking as you were talking, when you said students don't have a lot of social capital, well, some do actually, because their families have a lot of social capital. So, if they can look at their parents, for example, and see how networked they are and how they work those networks, they would talk about that at home. This is for younger students, obviously. And I was thinking of myself as a first in family person who, left school and wandered off to university without much kind of networking around me. And if someone had said to me or taken me aside and given me some tutoring or coaching in, okay, well, you need to think about this for your career and, you need to get out there. It's been shown in the literature that students who actually do go to career fairs, start to be able to talk to employers and potential employers, and they speak more confidently and they feel more confident about their own career prospects, and other people see them then as looking more confident, therefore more employable. So it is a pretty messy, it's a very muddy concept, employability, and it's all of those things. So anyway, I just thought I'd add that about the social capital.
That's a very good point. Now we're fast approaching the final 10 minutes or so of this session. And I did want to go to some of the questions that we've received. And funnily enough, this is something that we discussed yesterday as well. One of our anonymous attendees has picked up that there's 3 Australians on this panel. So apologies to you, Kim. The question is, what are your views on the Australian government's plans to increase university tuition fees for humanities subjects and reduce them for quote unquote, and this is what they've written, job relevant STEM courses? Beverly, I'm going to throw that straight to you because I'm hoping finally make some fireworks.
Okay, well, I did a humanities course at a Australian university and I've been employed my whole life. So I don't know what job relevant means, and I think I can see what the government's trying to do. And I know they're trying to steer people to where they think the jobs are going to be. It's not entirely clear to me what that's based on. I would like to see some more data. And there's been a lot of commentary, which I'll just summarise briefly, which is a lot of younger undergraduate students are fairly tone deaf to those fees anyway, because they are a future debt that they will acquire. And they will probably go and study the things that turn them on actually at this point in their lives. And I think that's a good thing. But I think students also should be aware that they can mix it up a bit in their degrees. They don't actually have to funnel themselves unless it's a highly orchestrated and accredited course where there's no room for any elective. You know, students should try to broaden as much as possible. I'm not sure how that government agenda will go, quite frankly, and it's just going through the Parliament at the moment. So we'll see how it goes. I think it's an unfortunate idea to try and steer people away from the humanities during the pandemic, when we know that humanity is the thing we're absolutely missing the most right now. And, you know, humanity, we need all the humanity we can get, and we need people understanding culture and international politics as well to be able to help us navigate this new world. So I think there's going to be plenty of jobs in that area, quite frankly.
Anton, can I add to what Beverly is saying, because my train of thought follows on from what she's mentioned?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
And I worked in Australia for 7 years. So even though I'm in Germany right now, I was running the commercial business of enrollment solutions out of Melbourne for 7 years. The accent doesn't say it, but I was. From my perspective with this, what we haven't spoken about is retention. We haven't spoken about what a university can do to keep their students engaged year after year until graduation, wanting to come back and do their postgraduate. And I think a piece here is about, you know, it's about how do we ensure that they own this degree. And when we've worked with thousands of students in Australia that are current students, they're first year students who started their undergraduate degree in most instances. And when they start to struggle and they start to have to make that hard decision before census date of whether or not they need to drop some courses of some units, or if they need to withdraw completely before there's a penalty, I'm absolutely shocked by the proportion of students who don't even bring fees up into it. So census date to them is just a reminder. It's week 5, make sure that you're up to date. But when we actually talk to them about financial penalties, it's kind of what? Oh, I don't know, I haven't even thought about what my degree is going to cost me, and I'm in my first semester. So this has nothing to do with me, even though in the end it will. So, you know, when I did see this, and I was already in Europe when the conversation started to come up about the fee changes in the specific course, the fields of study, the first thought I did have was, I wonder if it will make a difference in domestic students' decisions. As an undergraduate, I'm not talking about postgraduate, but as an undergraduate student who does get the funding, and I'm not sure, so I'm actually quite interested to watch from abroad what this does mean to enrollment numbers and applications, and you know how this looks when the tax start to put applications together.
And of course, if we're going to go down the Australian government policy, higher education government policy, there is a proposal that if a student fails half of their subjects, they'll lose their access to the government loans, which makes it counter to what I was discussing of giving the opportunity for students to fail. Gordon, very quickly on this, do you have any views on the policy to reduce, to increase tuition fees and reduce them for job relevant STEM courses?
I'm an arts graduate and I've been employed my entire adult life. Look, let's not fall into the trap of saying this is Australian government policy. It's an idea that's been floated. It's got to pass the Senate yet, and not a lot of legislation has in the last couple of years. So I would have thought that this one will probably be revised quite heavily before it gets passed by the Australian Senate. Again, I can see what the Australian government is trying to do. They're trying to ensure that universities pull up their socks and are providing job relevant degrees. And look, the same should be said for the private system as well as for the vocational sector. But at the end of the day, this should be a demand-led industry. So yeah, kudos for the concept. Let's just work on the execution.
Brilliant. I think we'll leave that the Australian government attempts at policy for there at the time. It's been a long session already. We also have another question from Siram, specifically for you, Beverly, which is, have you in your experience seen any stellar career services teams? Why would you rate them well? And is it because of better industry connections, better ability to coach students, or something else?
Look, I'd have to call out the team from my former university, Deakin University, and that is the graduate employability team. So Deakin was the first university that actually constituted, I think, not a careers service as such, but reinvented that as the graduate employability team that did a whole pile of things, got students absolutely networked with employers online, had a program called Interns at Deakin, where every senior manager in the university was encouraged, indeed, really encouraged, to provide employment opportunities for our own students in their teams. So at least they had some work experience. But mostly that team also got engaged in the curriculum and worked directly with academics on rethinking and redesigning some of their assessment pieces so that they were more work integrated, if I can put it that, and more authentic, resembling the sorts of jobs that new graduates would be asked to do. So I'm sure Gordon knows many others, but that's one that's near to my experience.
Yeah, we've got to stop agreeing, don't we? We're not providing the entertainment that we promised. I agree. I think Deakin. The other one is probably Curtin, and I know that Curtin went to a lot of effort a couple of years ago to actually focus upon the issue of scale. So similar to what my business does, they provide online training, and they're actually trying to help the vast majority of their students to develop certain skills related to the job application process online, so that by the time they walk through the door for a physical appointment with student services, they've already got a professionally prepared resume, they've already got a cover letter, they already know how to answer selection criteria, they've already got interview skills, etc. So the theory's been covered, there's been some practice, and they're actually ready to go. That's what I mean by scale, and I think they do it well.
Right.
And of course, both of those are Australian universities after I tried to get it away from Australia. We are fast running out of time. We've got our final 5 minutes. So that's all for the Q&A section. I want to end it with the easiest question I can come up with. I'll start with you, Kim. How will graduate employability change in the coming years?
Yeah, from my perspective, Anton, I think that the graduate's going to change because the business is going to change. We already are thinking about what the new world of employment looks like. So as employees and employers already in industry, we're all working from home. We've had to all pick up what this looks like when we have to do sales over the phone, when we have to do, mid-year reviews over the phone. This is all very different and new. And the practices are all very different and new. So I think that's going to influence, and it has to. Beverly said this earlier, and said it, Gordon, that industry has to work closely with universities so that it's a partnership. what is required in the industry has to be taught at the universities, and it has to be guided by the employers. So I think the engagement in the topic of that we're talking about today, we need to increase that in a more effective way, the employer engagement between universities and employers.
And for you, Gordon, how do you see graduate employability changing over the next few years?
Well, probably the biggest thing that I predict, and is starting to happen already. Did you see the headline yesterday announcing that Google is becoming a disruptor in the university sector? So now I absolutely predict we're going to see it's game on. COVID has brought about a massive disruption. Students are used to learning online, and universities really, I think, need to look very carefully at what some of these major organisations are capable of delivering in order to have very specific skills studied online. So from a perspective of employability, I predict there's going to be a lot more competition against the university sector by large organisations that will deliver online training.
Well, the other issue as well is in terms of employment. Google has already said that they don't really necessarily see the need to go to graduates from higher education and are dipping into the high school system and the community college system in the US. But for Beverly, in your perspective, how do you see graduate employability changing over the coming years?
I was going to mention the Google certificates, so totally agree on that. So in some fields, and particularly IT, I can see industry actually taking off with the certifications. Some would argue they did that years ago with their own certifications. And IT is very difficult to teach at a university because it's the curriculum changes so fast, it's really hard to keep up with it. So I think in that discipline, absolutely. In other disciplines though, because of accrediting bodies and because you can't be an engineer without going to university as far as I know, or a nurse or a doctor or those roles, even accounting at the moment, most people do go to university, but I do see that this will become more of a contested space. I'm going to be provocative. I would like to see it become more of a contested place. I would like to see us talking about learning integrated work and not so much about work integrated learning. Work integrated learning sort of means we open the curriculum a tiny bit and shoehorn a bit of work in there. I'd like to see it actually happening in the workplace. We've seen apprenticeship degrees take off in the UK, for example. I would like to see industry experts trained as assessors so that they can be assessors within a program. I mean, university assessors. Why can't they be adjunct staff? They're already out being experts in their discipline and in their field. I would like to see, as Kim said, that gap absolutely closed over. And I think that would be not just good for universities, and it would be very good for industry. The great winner out of that would be the learner who graduates and actually is a product of that. So that's where I'd like to see it go.
Absolutely. And a lot of what you've just said also hits into, so achieving that means that other things need to be achieved as well. For example, if one employer has their own credential, for example, will that be recognized by others? Unfortunately, that is all we have time for on this month's episode of QS in Conversation Live. Thank you again to Beverly, Gordon, and Kim for joining me to discuss for the past hour. I imagine we can go on for another hour and a bit further. Now, we do have other things coming up in the next few weeks. In particular, we have QS Maple, which will be the Middle East and Africa region conference. It is themed Middle East and Africa, innovative Middle East and Africa, higher education-led economic diversity and globalization. To get your ticket, to find out more, go to qsmaple.org. That's qsmaple.org. And then on behalf of the head of programs, Monica Hunon-Katan, good night and thank you for watching.